Somebody's just going to see this clip and just go into a full rage spiral. It's a little wild how many fish are described in this book. I literally said reading these feels like torture. I'm enjoying it. Please don't be mad at me. Hello, friends, and welcome back. As you can see, today we're going to be discussing every single thing that I read in December. I actually goaled myself to read a ton of books in December, and because of that, I had a really good reading month. I actually didn't read as much as I planned to this month, but I still read a lot. If you've been here before, you know that I do a whole bunch of different reading projects, so I've really broken those down throughout this video, so we're going to talk about each of them individually. And at the end, I'm going to give you a little preview of what I'm planning to read for January. We have got a ton to discuss for this month, though, so grab a tasty beverage, get comfy, and let's jump in. Okay, so it was December, so I want to kick things off with a holiday read. As many of you know, I do a podcast with 3 other wonderful human beings called The Panelists, and every month we've been reading a romance book throughout history. We started like way back in what is considered the very first romance, and we've been working our way forwards. Now, we decided to take a giant leap forward and do a holiday special episode and read a Christmas-themed romance book. And we decided to choose Good Spirits by B.K. Borison because this is like one of the hottest holiday books that has come out this year. A lot of people are reading it. A lot of people are talking about it. All of us kind of wanted to read it. And so that's what we chose. This is sort of a romantic spin on A Christmas Carol. We follow a character who she is, she's like bumbling around in life. And then she gets visited by a ghost of Christmas past who starts to show her things in her past and is trying to, basically it's his job. Like he literally like clocks into work, and there are a whole bunch of ghosts of Christmas past. They clock in and they go and they take people into their past and try to make them better people before they hand them off to a ghost of Christmas present. But they keep going back to her past, and like it really doesn't seem like she's done anything that terrible. And then they start going into his past, and it's a whole thing. So it's like, what is happening? Is something wrong? Is the system broken? Overall, I enjoyed this for what it was. It's very much a Hallmark movie type book. You have to suspend your disbelief a lot, not only just for the paranormal aspect of it. There's a lot of things that kind of happen only because the plot needs them to happen. I will say, I think the characters and their banter is probably the best thing about this book. There's some really great character work here. For me, I think the 2 standouts of things that I didn't love about this book are the fact that the ghost, our ghost man, is not very ghosty. He can feel things, he can taste things, he can get turned on by things. Like, he's barely a ghost. If it wasn't written on page that he was a ghost, you probably wouldn't know he was a ghost. I'm going to be honest. He's very, very human. And I think the problem there is that going into this book, you kind of want a paranormal story, right? Like you're looking for paranormal romance because that's kind of what it's billed as. And it's not very paranormal. Even like the organization that he works for and the company that he's working for, that's like this paranormal, like Ghosts of Christmas, whatever company, all feels very by the book. It doesn't seem very magical. It doesn't seem very special. And I mean, yeah, they are ghosts, but it's made to feel as real and normal as possible. And that makes it not feel very paranormal, which that was kind of sad for me. I do think that I ended up enjoying this book a lot more than I thought I was going to, and that's mainly because of my love for A Christmas Carol. And also the main character, kind of her arc is that she is a people pleaser, and she people pleases so much that she ends up not doing a lot of things for herself. She doesn't really stand up for herself, and that becomes a problem. If you people please too much, you kind of just let people walk all over you, and that kind of sucks. And I felt very seen. I felt very represented by this. And so I think that helped me enjoy the book a lot. My other complaint is not fair to this book at all. I want you to take it with a grain of salt because we went into this book knowing that it is a romance, okay? And it's a Christmas romance. So we knew just based on the genre alone that it was going to have a really happy ending. Romance books have happy endings. Like that's part of the ingredient list is a happy ending. There's a point in this book towards the end where the ending could have been sad or even like bittersweet or like hopeful but not happy. And I personally prefer that kind of ending. I love a hopeful, not happy, not sad, but like hopeful for what's to come type ending. I like a bittersweet ending. I don't love an ending that's like tied up in a bow and so happy all the time. And I know that's what I signed up for. Okay. I know, like I said, this isn't a fair critique. But it made me enjoy the book a little bit less because when we got to the end and everything was happy, 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 I was like, I wanted a little sad. I wanted a little bittersweet. Even the sadness that is there, like there is a moment where you feel like it could have a sad ending. it's not even long enough. It's like a blink of an eye. It's so quick that you don't even get to feel the emotions of it. And I just wanted more of that. I wanted more of that kind of like crushing, like soul crushing feeling at the end. And I think maybe if I'd gotten a little bit more of it, I would have been okay with then the resolution. But because it was so quick, it was so brief, it just felt like I wanted more. I wanted more. I wanted a little more heartache. I know that's crazy to say in a romance book, but sometimes that moment in the third act of heartache can really sell the super happy ending, because you kind of have to have that dip of like, is it going to work out? To have that moment where you're like, yes, you know, and I didn't really feel like I got to celebrate, because I didn't even get much of that moment of like, oh, I don't know. It was so fast, like a blink of an eye, like a couple paragraphs, and then everything was resolved. And I was like, ah. So for me, this was just okay. This is going to be an unhaul for me. I don't think I would ever read it again. However, I would try reading another B.K. Borison book. I didn't hate the book by any stretch of the imagination. I wasn't hate reading it. I wasn't angry at it. It was exactly what it was, right? It was a cutesy, paranormal-ish holiday romance. And for what it was, I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy it enough that I'd want to come back to it in the future. It's like I've seen what I needed to see, and I would absolutely try this author out again, but not this book. All right, so I mentioned that we'll be diving into a whole bunch of different reading projects I've been working on. These first two books are sort of outside of that. So Good Spirits was for the podcast, so I guess that kind of is within a reading project. Futbolista is not. Futbolista I read purely because I wanted to, but I want to tell you kind of the story of this book. So Futbolista, as you can tell, is a sports romance. It is by one of my favorite authors, Johnny Garzavilla. One of my favorite books of all time is this book called Ander and Santi Were Here, which is a young adult queer romance book. And I love that book. And so this year, Johnny Garzavilla came out with Futbolista, and I was so hyped for it. As it was coming out, because the publisher knew that I was a big fan of Johnny Garzavilla's work, they reached out and they asked me to do an ad for the book. And so I quickly sped read the first like third half of the book so that I could make an ad for the book. When I'm making an ad, typically I'm not doing a review, because that's sort of weird. I never like take money for a review. That feels weird. So when I'm doing an ad, it's all about the hype, right? It's all about telling you why you would like this book, what you would enjoy about it, trying to get you to see if this is something that would be for you. It's an ad, right? It's an ad. You get it. The problem was that after I did this like crazy binge read to make this ad, to get it in on time, to get it approved, life happened, and I actually never finished the book, which is crazy because this was one of my most anticipated reads of the year, and I never got back to it. Crazy. So I decided that for the end of the year, I wanted to finally read this. I also should mention, it was not a bad experience making that ad. Like, there was nothing about it that made me like, oh, I can't read this right now. It didn't happen. I just never got back to it. They were lovely to work with. I still love the author. There was nothing bad that happened, especially in this content creator space. I find that sometimes when I do something for work, I immediately need like a break from it before I can enjoy it just for me. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. Cut to December. I was like, I really want to read Futbolista, and I wasn't going to get a chance to read it because there was something else that I was trying to get through this month that I thought was going to eat up all my time. I ended up not reading all of that. We'll talk about that in a moment, but that gave me extra time. So I decided to finally sit down and read Futbolista. I started it back from the beginning and read through the whole thing, and I'm so glad I did. I loved it so much. If you watched my top 10 books of the year, this actually ended up being on it, so I'm really glad I got back to it. This is a sports romance. We're following a character who is a goalie for his college team, and he's a really good goalie, but there is a lot of homophobia in any sport, as we know. And he starts to discover throughout this story that he is in fact bi. And so he has this like bi awakening, but at the same time, he's like, I cannot come out because I'm on this team. And if I come out, people will treat me terribly. Not to mention that is reinforced by the fact that the captain of his team is like super homophobic. And I do want to say, if you're going to read this, this is new adult. So it's not young adult. It is new adult. If you're going to read it, though, know that there is some heavy homophobia in this book, which makes sense for the story. Like, it all works for what is trying to be accomplished here. And I will say, because it is new adult, there's also some spice. For me, I thought it was quite a bit of spice. I'm sure a lot of people who read like spicy books would be like, that was nothing. That was a bell pepper worth of spice. I don't know what the spice ranking is. But for me, who doesn't read a ton of spicy books, I thought it was like quite a bit of spice. Really loved the main couple here. I thought they were just lovely, supportive, kind human beings that I wanted to see succeed and be successful and be together. And it just was a really lovely read. I enjoyed it a lot. Obviously, like, I love sports stories in general. I read a lot of them and I watch a lot of them in the anime and manga space, actually, but I don't read a ton of them in the like physical book prose space. So this was like a nice change of pace from that. And I think that what's nice about this book is it really celebrates being courageous. There's so many coming out stories. I feel like I am a little bit tired of the coming out storyline. Not to say that they shouldn't exist, because they absolutely should. They're still needed. But for me personally, like, I like, at this point in my life, I like reading books where the characters are already out and living their lives a little bit more, just for me personally. And in this book, though, I really enjoyed the coming out storyline, because when put on that backdrop of the sports romance side, it was really cool to see this character, you know, realize that, like, he is coming out, he's going to not be liked by a lot of people, but he's also going to ultimately be someone else's hero. Him coming out helps pave that path for someone else who is young and who is looking up to him to be like, oh my gosh, he did it, I could do it. And I thought that was really beautiful, of like opening those gates to more people, making that path easier for the people who come after you. And it had that message to it. There's also a whole aspect. So his love interest, our sports player, they kind of meet because his love interest is really into philosophy, and he becomes his like philosophy tutor. And so there's some like light philosophy discussions in the book that I really enjoyed, as well, as someone who just likes that more like critical thinking about the world, you know, thoughtfulness. And that was in here. It's not too heavy-handed. It's not overbearing on the book, but it was just enough that I enjoyed it. I thought it created some really interesting discussion and conversation points within the book. But anyway, I love this. I give it 5 out of 5 stars. Obviously, you're going to be looking for something specific if you're looking for this book, right? It is new adult. It has spice. It is a romance for sure. It is a queer romance. It is a bi-awakening type romance. But I think if you're looking for those things, this is one of the best that I've read in that genre. I really loved it a lot. And one of my top Johnny Garzavillas. I think that Under and Santi Were Here is still my favorite of theirs, but I really liked this one a lot too. All right, now we are getting into the projects. One of the projects I'm doing is that I am attempting to read all of the Star Wars books. There are over 400 Star Wars books. Am I ever going to read them all? Probably not. But it's a fun thing to say that I'm trying to read them all. When I started reading Star Wars books, I'm going to do a little history lesson here. In the Star Wars book world, there are sort of two pathways that you can follow. And the first one is called the Star Wars Legends books. So those books are basically books that were written before Disney acquired Star Wars. None of them are considered canon, and they essentially were written in this time before Disney acquired it. And so they really flesh out what comes after Episode 6, and they go on, you know, to these big great things that happen with Luke and introduce new characters. And they also flesh out other parts of the storyline as well. But a lot of them really focus on that post Episode 6 time frame. And also some of them deal with like Old Republic type stuff, which takes place thousands of years before. You know, it's like all over the place, right? And then the other lane that you can go on is the canon stuff. So after Disney acquired Star Wars, every book that is released from them is now considered part of the canon. So it all takes place in the same universe as the movies and the TV shows and all of that stuff. Something I wanted to do when I started doing this was I wanted to go back and read through each of the novelizations of the movies and compare them to the movies themselves. Like compare the books to the movies to kind of give myself like a central grounding point. And so this month I read through all three of these books, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and The Return of the Jedi. And then on Christmas Day, we actually watched all three movies back to back, which was really fun. And so I was able to sort of like compare them right up against each other. And I discovered a couple things. So first things first, of these three books, by far my favorite was A New Hope. And even watching the movies, I haven't watched the movies in a really long time. I haven't come back to them. They're sort of like things that I just knew what happened in, but now coming into them with this kind of fresh perspective, because I'm reading a ton of Star Wars, I'm really kind of like drenching myself in the Star Wars universe. So coming back to them, it was like nice. I had a pretty fresh perspective, which I thought was great. And I liked this one the most for a couple reasons. First and foremost, it has just a really classic hero story. If you've seen A New Hope, you know exactly what happens in this book. For the most part, we're going to talk about a little bit of an addition that I thought was great in the book. This book, by the way, says it's written by George Lucas, but it was actually ghostwritten by Dean Allen Foster. So that's interesting. It feels like reading classic dark fantasy, which I think is really interesting, even though it is a sci-fi book. I mean, it's very space fantasy, but the structure and the character archetypes that are there are all very, very classic dark fantasy. And I've been reading a ton of dark fantasy this year. So coming into this and reading this was really interesting to kind of see it through that lens. I don't know. I thought that was really fun. What I think is interesting here, if you've gone really deep down the Star Wars rabbit hole, you know that there are some scenes near the beginning of A New Hope that were cut. And you can actually watch these scenes in very low resolution online. And essentially in these scenes, we see Luke interacting with his friend friends, one of which is a character named Biggs, who we do see in the movie towards the end of the movie when they're on Yavin 4 preparing to go fight the Death Star. He runs into Biggs and they're like, oh my gosh, old buddies, this is going to be just like old times. Okay. So in these deleted scenes, which are also in the book, we see him interacting with these friends and Biggs. And in this interaction, we talk about how Biggs is going off to join the Rebel Alliance. We see them kind of look up into the sky and see the battle that is going on above them when Darth Vader is capturing Princess Leia. And you see this like youthful, I just want to get out there and have an adventure that Luke is having. He wants to go with his friends. He wants to be part of these star battles. To him, it's all this like grand adventure that he wants to go on. And what's interesting is then you get to the end of the story where Biggs is a character who, when we're flying around trying to take down the Death Star, Biggs, his friend, is killed during that sequence. Okay. And we see that in the movie. And the addition of this opening part in the book, I think is really powerful because we start the story and we're introduced to this character Biggs and we see Luke in his most youthful, like, I just want to go off with my friends and have an adventure. But then when we see that character die towards the end of the book, it really has that full circle, like coming of age. Oh, this is actually serious. This is actually adult. This isn't just a silly fun time. This is like, we are fighting for the freedom of the galaxy, right? And it really has this great full circle moment, this really great realization moment where it's like, oh, this is so much bigger than I thought it was. This isn't just an adventure. Like, this is serious stuff that is happening. And reading this made me happy that I read it because it was great to see those scenes in the context of the entire story. And it made me a little sad that they're not in the movie because I do think you still get that effect. You still get that youthful Luke kind of coming into that adulthood Luke aspect. You still see that. But it really is nice to have that like physical representation, to have that moment of, I just want to go with my friends, and then seeing what happens to those friends when they go into this war. I just really liked it a lot. I thought it did a really good job of capturing, again, this like really classic hero's tale that is A New Hope. I enjoyed reading this a lot, and I enjoyed watching the movie again a lot. In fact, when we got done watching the three movies, I said, I think that this might actually be my favorite of the three now. I've always said, because everyone always says that their favorite of the three is The Empire Strikes Back. But after watching these three again, I actually found that this one was the one that I gravitated towards. Like, if I had to pick one that I liked the most, it was A New Hope. And I thought that was really interesting. Unfortunately, The Empire Strikes Back was my least favorite of these books. This is written by Donald F. Glut. The problem with this book is it just doesn't have a voice. This is exactly what you think of when you think of a movie novelization in like the worst way. Obviously, this came out a long time ago, right? So things have definitely changed in the movie novelization space. I am aware of that. But last month I read Revenge of the Sith. I read the novelization of that. And that is to me what I hope that every novelization is. It takes the source material, expands on it, fills in details, makes it richer, like really gets into the details that we don't necessarily always have time for in a film. This book is the complete opposite. It follows the script to a T. I'll talk about why that's a problem in a second, but also actually leaves some things out. So you actually get more content by watching the movie, which is crazy. And also what's interesting about following the script to a T is there are really important moments, one in particular that was ad-libbed into this movie, that was improvised and is not in the book. And that is probably the most iconic line, although there are several iconic lines in this movie, but one of the most iconic lines is when Han Solo is about to be frozen in carbonite and Leia says, I love you, and Han Solo says, I know. And in the book, Leia says, you know I love you, right? And he says, well, you better remember that because I'm getting out of here. And it's not nearly as iconic, I can tell you that. I found this book to be really disappointing. It is like a step above reading the script with stage directions or with screen directions, not stage directions. It's not a play, though I would watch that play. Just so you know, it really feels like one step above that because you're literally just retracing the steps of exactly everything that happens in the movie. And also, but like in a worse way, because there's some things that are just not there. They're not necessary to the story, but they are like little scenes that we just don't get to see. And also you're getting the worst version of the story before these actors stepped in and like punched it up a little bit, or not even always actors, right? Like sometimes when you're on set and you're filming, a scriptwriter will say, oh, that line doesn't land like we wanted to, let's rewrite it. Or an actor will say, oh, I have an idea. Or let me try this, right? And it's just missing all of that. So you're getting like the rough draft of this story without any embellishments, without any like extra added meat or potatoes. You don't need to read this. And that's kind of unfortunate. Like, you truly are not missing out on anything not reading this. I feel the exact opposite about Revenge of the Sith. I think reading Revenge of the Sith makes that story so much better. I feel like this is a book you could easily skip, because even if you read it, you're going to walk away being like, why did I spend my time doing that? There's no good reason. There's no good reason. I honestly felt very similarly about Return of the Jedi. The one good thing I will say for Return of the Jedi, this is by James Caan. I think the writing here was at least a little bit better. Like, the writing here was at least like fun to read. And there's little embellishments. There's little added details, like, talking about certain characters that we don't get much information on in the movie. Like, they're kind of embellishing that a little bit. We're getting some embellishments on the ships and the characters and the droids and the kind of background stuff that kind of fades into the background, but it's fun to get those little extra details. There's not a ton, okay? I'm not telling you to go out and read this. I think this book is still very much by the book, following the movie so closely that you really don't need to read it. But at least it was a little bit more enjoyable to read. At least I felt like I was getting a little something, a little extra spice to the movie by reading the book. And just flat out, the writing was just better. Like, the writing of the actual prose and the way that the story is crafted in this is just a little bit better. But still, I don't think you need to read it. So coming away from these 3 books, somebody's just going to see this clip and just go into a full rage spiral. How dare you put thumbs down on Empire and Return of the Jedi? But the reason I put those there is because I think if you are interested in Star Wars books and you want to read novelizations, I totally think A New Hope is worth the read. I don't think Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi are worth the read. Even worse, something I really thought about when I was reading these books is that, listen, I know this is going to sound like rage bait, but I promise you it's not. When you read A New Hope, you do get that full circle, like, hero's journey storyline. When you read Empire and Jedi, you kind of realize like they don't have very much plot. There's not a lot going on. They are visual spectacles. As a trilogy, they are a beautiful set of films, okay? Don't get me wrong. I love these films. I love the story of these films. I love the characters. But when you actually read Empire and Jedi, you realize there's not a whole lot of plot. It's sort of just like set piece scenes one after another that luckily there's just enough story, just enough plot to string them into something really wonderful. But a lot of what makes those films great is actually not the plot. It's the world. It's how you just feel completely mesmerized by all these things happening on the screen. This world feels so incredibly real and lived in, and it just like sweeps you into it. The production design of these 3 films is so impeccable, is so incredible, is so brilliant. From all of the puppets to the sets, to the costumes, to the music, to the lighting, it's all brilliant. It just doesn't have that much story. And that's okay, because they still manage to be excellent movies. But when you go to a book where literally the thing that matters more than anything else in a book is the plot, like that is the thing you have. You don't have lighting, you don't have the visual, you don't have the music. So you're relying on this plot structure to carry you through. And you kind of realize how it's just not very strong in these books. And that's okay, because they're meant to be movies. Okay, what I really walked away from with these is like the medium that these were meant for is film. And that is not a bad thing at all. So please, I promise I'm not trying to rage bait you. I'm just telling you A New Hope is worth reading, and the other 2 you can absolutely skip. All right, so on to another one of the projects that I'm working on. So as you may know, I'm currently working my way through the history of science fiction. And this month I read 2 books in my science fiction history readathon. And one of them, I'm going to give this a little bit of a caveat. One of them, which is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I've already made a video about, like a short video, which is kind of how I'm chronicling these. And so I've done some research on it. I've actually like done a little bit of digging on the history of it. And the other one I haven't done yet because I was supposed to do that today and didn't get to it. So the other one is going to be mostly just me talking about like pure reactions to the book itself. This will talk a little bit more maybe about the history, though I don't have a lot to say that I haven't already said in my short video. But 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. This chronicles, we follow some characters who basically kind of sort of get kidnapped by Captain Nemo, who runs the Nautilus, which is this submarine that is like traveling around the world. Story starts out that there is this giant sea monster basically like breaking ships throughout the world. And so our main character and then some other characters, they get on board a vessel that's going to hunt this giant creature. And when they find it, they find out that it's actually a ship. And the 3 characters fall overboard and they get rescued by the Nautilus, which is run by Captain Nemo. However, Captain Nemo is like, once you know about this ship, once you're on it, once you know the secret, you can't leave. So you're here for the long haul. And our main character is totally fine with that. But like, there's another character who was the master harpooner on the ship that was after this monster / Nautilus. And he is not okay with it. Like, he wants to be free. He wants to get off this ship. And so you follow these characters. And what's interesting is that this Nautilus ship is very much on a journey of like discovery. So Captain Nemo is just completely obsessed with the underwater world. And so they are traveling around the world and they are discovering different fish and discovering different underwater things and discovering different islands. A lot of it is about discovery and science. And it reads sometimes a little bit like a travel log. There are a ton of descriptions of fish. Oh my God. So many descriptions of fish. It's a little wild how many fish are described in this book. Like it's a lot. It's overbearing at times. Something really interesting to me, which won't be as interesting to you if you already know this, but considering this is the author that wrote Journey to the Center of the Earth, I had this thought in my head that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was like a depth thing, which we were like going like that deep into the ocean. That is not what's happening here. It actually is about the distance traveled throughout the world, like, but underwater. So I went into this story kind of thinking it was going to be a whole different thing. I really thought it was kind of going to be like a Journey to the Center of the Earth situation where we're like journeying down and seeing like different depths of the ocean. That's not what's happening. We're pretty much just like scooting around the entire world in a submarine. And genuinely, I enjoyed this. I do think there are parts of the story where it's just like crazy slow. Like there'll be parts where it's like really interesting. And I think the star of this show is the Nautilus. Like when you get on board this ship and you're walking around, they're explaining how the inner workings of this thing works. I was completely captivated. You really can envision this thing. This book came out in a time where like submarines were really primitive. And so the fact that Jules Verne imagined this like very futuristic kind of what ends up transpiring as submarines is really kind of amazing. And having this whole amazing ship described is just wonderful. Like I really enjoyed all of that. And you know what? I did kind of enjoy some of the fish stuff too, because there's a lot of moments where they go underwater and they're exploring these different environments. I really like underwater theme stuff. I like video games that are set underwater. I like movies that are set underwater. Weirdly, I'm like scared of water. I don't like swimming. I don't like the ocean, things like that. But I enjoy that as a setting. I don't know what that is. I think it's like sometimes when you're scared of something, you enjoy it from afar. Does that make sense? I think also what's interesting is Captain Nemo it's not blatantly said in this book, but I think it's said in another one. He is essentially Indian, so he's like a person of color, and it is talked about a lot how he is very like anti-imperialist, anti-colonialism, and I think that's interesting because when you read a little bit more about Jules Verne, a lot of his work, a lot of people will say that it is a product of the time, and maybe it is, but he has like a lot of racist depictions of indigenous people and things like that in his book. So it's interesting that you have this character that is so esteemed and so intelligent and so masterful at his craft who is like a person of color, but then they end up at an island with indigenous people, and the way he describes them is horrible. And he uses language that you don't see today because it's no longer acceptable, and for good reason. And that dichotomy I found very interesting. Like there are definitely aspects of this book that just have not aged well. But I will say, if you're planning to read this, just know that there is some language used that is really not great. It's interesting because Captain Nemo, I guess, is sort of the villain here, but he also kind of is an anti-hero because he's sort of a hero for the oppressed people of the world. Like he is fighting back against like the big machine that is Europe. I don't know. It's all very interesting. I enjoyed this book quite a bit. In fact, I would go so far as to say with all of the sci-fi stuff I've read so far, which isn't a ton yet, we're still pretty early on, but this is probably the one I've enjoyed the most so far. So I thought that was really interesting. I don't know if I'm going to run out and read more Jules Verne. I think it was a little heavy-handed on the description. I don't know if I want more of that right this moment, but this was a good time. There was only maybe a little bit of a chunk, like 3/4 of the way through, where I felt like I was struggling through it a little bit because there are times where the pacing of this book grinds to a halt. And there are times where I was like, 1 or 2 chapters felt like they took super long to get through just because the pacing just like completely slows down. So I thought that was a little unfortunate, but the book was originally released in a serialized way. So they would like release a chapter and then another chapter, like every week you would get a chapter, kind of like comic book style a little bit. And because of that, when it gets all put into a book, it makes sense that there are going to be some weird pacing issues. And so there are some weird pacing pieces to this book. But overall, I enjoyed this quite a bit. The other sci-fi history book that I read this month was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is the one, I haven't really done a whole lot of research on this yet, so I'm really just going to be giving you kind of my first impressions of the book. I will mention this is basically a short story. I don't know. I don't think it's long enough to be considered a novella, but I could be wrong about that because I don't know the specific rules. But this is really short and sweet. And I will say the structure of this this story is really bizarre. So you are following essentially a lawyer as he is sort of uncovering the fact that there is this awful man going about town and doing terrible things. And this awful man is connected to this really esteemed gentleman that he works for named Dr. Jekyll. This doctor, everybody loves him. He's a great guy. But then there's this other guy who like kind of lives in his home and like has a key to his house called Mr. Hyde, who's causing problems throughout the town. And most of the book plays out as like a mystery. Like, what is going on? What is going on? What is happening? And then in the last chapter is like a big old lore dump, big old info dump, where you basically just find out everything that's happened. Dr. Jekyll made this potion to separate his identities, blah, 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 blah. The classic story. I'm glad I read this. The structure to me was really a mess. Like the way that the story is laid out, I really did not like. I didn't like that it was so heavy on the explanation in the final chapter, and then the rest of the book, it feels like two separate books, kind of. It's really weird. The first part, you're just like going along with this mystery and like, what is going on? And you know what doesn't help? Let me tell you what doesn't help is that I knew how it ended. If you know anything about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you know the surprise. Oh, they're the same person, right? If I didn't know that, if I went in and I was like living in the time when this came out and I read it for the first time, we got to the end, I was like, they're the same person. That would be like a major plot twist. And I would have been like all in. I was like, what is happening? But because you know that, the mystery of it is sort of spoiled because you know what's going to happen. And then when you get to the reveal, you're kind of just like, yeah, we know, like, get on with it. But the reveal chapter is like so long because they've got to give you all this information to make everything make sense. But you're like, yeah, they're the same person. I got it. Let's move on with our life. Let's get done. Oh, we're at the last page. Okay, great. From a sci-fi standpoint, I love the concept of like this dual nature of man and like splitting your personality into like the good and the evil and like splitting that apart. I think that has a lot of really interesting ramifications for the sci-fi genre in general. Obviously, that is something that is still in the sci-fi genre as we move forward into the world. And talking about like science sort of splitting the human soul or splitting the human psyche, all of that's super interesting. But the actual book part, like the actual story part, I think maybe I would have liked it more if I didn't already know, I guess, which is such a sad thing to say. But really, like, there's not a whole lot here. Literally, what is here is a little bit of lead up of mystery of like something's going on, and then a bunch of info to tell you what's going on. And if you already know what's going on, the mystery is not that mysterious. And then the part of the book that tells you what's going on feels really long and boring because you're like, yeah, girl, I know. Like, this is the same guy. Like, look at them. That's the same guy. So it's fine. It was fine. I'm glad I read it. It wasn't life-changing. I don't know that I would recommend people read it. I feel like this is such a horrible thing to say about a classic book. But, you know, like, I feel like you could just read the Cliff Notes for this one or like a plot summary. Like, I don't think you need to read this whole thing. I think you could just sit down and read a plot summary and go, oh, okay, so those two guys, same person. Got it. And you would kind of get everything you needed to know from it. Is that crazy? Is that rage bait? I don't know. This was just okay. It was just okay. And I wanted more. And I don't know how I would get that. I think there's ways to make it more interesting. I think you could do like a modernized version of this. I'm sure people have done lots of modernized versions of this to, you know, spice it up to not like that kind of spice, not like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, none of that. But like, you know, to give it a little bit more, because at the end of the day, this feels like the rubric for what eventually will become more stories like this. And it feels like that because it is, I know. But also, it's not necessarily fun to read that, like read this story in its most simple, basic form. It was just okay. I'm glad it was so short. So there's that. I will just say as an afterthought, I am really glad that I'm doing this project, reading through the history of sci-fi. I know that I haven't really loved a lot of the books that I've read for it yet. However, I've loved the process of doing it. I've really enjoyed seeing the evolution of sci-fi through these years as I read through these books. And I'm excited to get a little bit further in this project and to see like some more modern day stuff. I'm enjoying the process, even if I don't necessarily enjoy the books that I'm reading for the process. Does that make sense? It's like the joy of reading versus the joy of reading this book. I think there's a differentiation there, and I'm really, really feeling it with this sci-fi series. I'm really enjoying the historical aspect of it and the learning that I'm doing. But even though I'm finding the books to be just okay so far, I think it's important to make that distinction. I'm enjoying it. Stop yelling at me. Oh boy, speaking of history. So for my book club this month, we decided to read A Wizard of Earthsea. I've never read Earthsea before. And I said, well, you know what? These 6 books are not that long. I'm going to read all 6 of them this month. And I'd never read them before. I purchased a hardbound copy that had all 6 books in it, plus some other stuff and some illustrations. I was like all in. I was like, this is classic fantasy. I'm going to love this. I love classic fantasy. I've read so much classic fantasy this year. I've had so much fun reading classic fantasy. One of my top 10 books of the year was the Chronicles of Prydain series, which I loved. That was classic fantasy. My favorite book of all time is Lord of the Rings, classic fantasy. There's no way I'm not going to like these. Well, guess what? As it turns out, I didn't love this. And I will say, okay, it's not a complete hate. It wasn't like, oh my God, I hated this series. It definitely wasn't. I think the world building here, like the actual world that is on display here and the lore of that world is phenomenal. Oh my God, I wanted to get lost in this world. It's so beautifully crafted with so much detail and so much lore, and I love that. The problem is that the characters that we are given to follow in this world feel like the most bland, uninteresting characters that I've ever met. Now, I will say the main character of the Tombs of Atuan, I liked quite a bit. I thought she was really interesting, but I don't know that I liked her character. I just liked the situation her character was in. I thought was really interesting. All of the characters are just so dry. And the plot of each of these books is so dry. Like reading these books felt like sandpaper. It felt like, oh, you know, when Bilbo is like spreading butter over too much toast, that's what reading these books feels like. Like you can, like the of the dry toast. I feel like that feeling is what I felt reading these books. I mean, it was a struggle and I really tried to stick with it. I really did. And the other thing that happens is like the first book, we're following this main wizard and we see him like grow up and coming of age. And I kind of was in, like, I was like, this is really dry, but I'm kind of into this. I'm enjoying watching this coming of age story for this young wizard. I like the world. I like the lore. I think I could be into this. The second book, we jump to a completely different character and eventually we meet back up with that wizard, but he's like gotten older. Third book, same thing. We jump to a completely different wizard and eventually we meet up with that wizard and he's like much older. And so he's kind of like that through line, at least so far. But like, I kept being pulled into different directions and having to meet these new characters and then being given honestly very little information about those characters. Like those characters just did not have that much personality to be like the stars of their own books. And each book also sort of feels like a prequel or the first act of a much bigger book. It feels like things just start getting going. Things just start happening. I just start to kind of get into, I'm like, okay, I think I'm getting into this. I'm finally like interested in this character and their story and what's going on with them. We're finally getting somewhere. And then the book ends and then we go to another book and we start over. And I'm like, why? What? Just like, give me a full story. Give me a full thing of one of these characters. Let me like follow their journey. And I wasn't allowed it. And so here is what happened. I got to the end of book 3, The Farthest Shore, and I decided to call it quits. I got to the end of that book and I realized I was like, I am not having fun. This is why I mentioned this with the sci-fi series, because even when I'm not enjoying those books, I'm having fun with the process of the discovery of them, reading them, exploring the history of them, seeing where these like tropes in sci-fi come from. Even if I'm not enjoying those books, I'm enjoying the process of reading them. These books, I was not enjoying the books and I was not enjoying the process of reading them. I literally said, reading these feels like torture. And that was my sign that it was time to go. So I read the first 3 and I stopped. I know the other 3 are written a little bit later. Like the first 3 are written in like the 60s, 70s. The other 3 I think are written in the 90s and on. And so maybe at some point I'll go back and try again. But I was reading so many things that I liked this month. And these were like the sore spot. Like when I was like going through a rotation, right? So I was reading this other series, which we'll talk about in a minute, called Skandar. I was reading that. I was reading sci-fi stuff. I was reading Star Wars. And then I was reading these. And every time I got to one of these, I was like, oh God, I have to mentally prepare myself because I know I'm going to be miserable while reading this. And then I was miserable while reading it. And they were not even long books. And they felt like the longest books I've ever read. And so I finally was like, this has to stop. It is the holiday season. Christmas is upon us. I cannot be like Scrooge walking around reading this book, being so angry about it. I did not love these. I understand why people do, though. I think the world and the lore and all of that is so captivating. I just did not for 1 second care about the character stories that were happening. A little bit in Tombs of Atuan. I will say that was, of the 3, that was my favorite. But every time I started to care, every time I was like on the cusp of like getting into it, the book would end. And then we would start over in the next one. And I couldn't do it. Sometimes you have to throw in the towel, and I threw in the towel, okay? And that was my journey with Earthsea. Please don't be mad at me. And so we come to the final books that I want to talk about this month. Now, these actually started out as part of my shelf control project. So I had the first 3 Skandar books on my shelf. They had been sent to me. Normally, I would not just go out and buy the first 3 books of something I haven't read yet. They were sent to me as part of like a PR package of like the company, you know, when they put out the 3rd book, they sent me a little box with all 3 of them. And I had heard really good things. So I decided to read the first one. I read it last month. And if you remember from my November reading wrap up, I loved it. So I was like, I'm in, I'm going to read these. So this month I read book 2, 3, 4, and 5. And there is a 6th book, which is like a prequel novella. I'll talk about that in a second, but I also read that. And I loved these so much. I'm going to give you just a little bit of breakdown about each one. I'm not going to spoil things, I don't think. I'm going to try really hard not to spoil things because I really want to convince you to read these, but I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about these. Quick recap from last month. Skandar and the Unicorn Thief is the story of a young boy named Skandar. We live in a modern day world in this story where there's a mainland and then there's an island where like wild unicorns live. And also there is a school where they teach young students how to ride unicorns and use their magic and like bond with them. And basically kids from the mainland are brought over to test to see if they can bond with a freshly born unicorn. And Skandar gets told he can't. And then he basically gets like brought to the island under the cover of night, snuck into the island. And it turns out that the reason they didn't want him there is because he is able to bond with, there's 4 elements of unicorns, very Avatar-esque. There's earth, fire, air, water. And he is able to bond with a 5th type of unicorn called a spirit unicorn. And spirit unicorns, because of things that have happened in the past on this island, are outlawed. They are forbidden. They are illegal. And so it turns out he can bond with one. And so we follow his story as a young man as he starts to go to unicorn school, essentially trying to cover up the fact that his unicorn is a spirit unicorn. Book 2 is Skandar and the Phantom Rider, and basically we're dealing with a lot of the fallout from the first book of kind of what happens at the end of the first book. And also this island, this book deals with something that is happening to the island. So wild unicorns are basically supposed to be immortal, nothing can kill them, and bonded unicorns that bond with these young people that then become adults, basically once they bond with a human, they give up their immortality. So a unicorn who bonds with a human is no longer immortal, but they get the benefits of having this like beautiful bond with each other. The immortal unicorns live out in the wild, and they are wild, bloodthirsty monsters, okay? And in this book, the wild unicorns are being killed, and people are blaming it on Skandar because of the spirit element, and they're not supposed to be able to die. So this is like a big deal. At the same time, the island that they're on, which has different zones for different elements, is starting to like go haywire. Like the volcanoes erupting, there's earthquakes, bad things are happening. And again, they're blaming it all on Skandar. And so he and his friends have to basically work out a way to like try and solve this mystery as to what's happening and try and fix it. And the way that this book progresses, it very well feels like it could be the last book in the series. Like it gets to these epic scales where like the island is falling apart and these kids are trying to save it. So as we start to go along from the first book into this book, something I want to mention, and here's the thing, I want to give almost like a trigger warning. I hate to invoke the name of J.K. Rowling, okay? I hate to compare books to Harry Potter because I think oftentimes people do that. They compare every middle grade book, like fantasy book ever made to Harry Potter, and that is just not necessary. It's like comparing every fantasy book ever made. Oh, it's like Lord of the Rings, or like something that people do in the board game space that drives me crazy is anytime I talk about any board game, people be like, it's like Dungeons and Dragons. Like, no, there are other things in the world. But I think it's important to discuss here. And the reason I say it is because I do believe that part of the reason I loved these so much is that they gave me the nostalgia that I felt. They made me feel like I was a kid again when I was first reading Harry Potter, before all of the nonsense, okay? Before all of her things that have made her awful. When I was a kid reading those books for the first time and falling in love with that magical world, I felt that again reading these books. It was the first time as an adult that I felt that feeling that I felt when I read those books as a kid. However, these books, in my opinion, correct a ton of the wrongs of those books. For one thing, these books are beautifully diverse, okay? Not just from a like skin color perspective, though they are diverse in that way, but this is also a very queer normative world. We see several characters who are in queer relationships or get into queer relationships as they grow older in this story. And there's no like coming out in this world. Like it's just accepted and it's just part of the story. And there are some characters who are in like traditional like male-female couples as things go on, as the kids get older. There's like a really prominent male-male couple. You start to see the whispers of like a female-female female couple as we go along with the story. There is a character who is in a wheelchair. There are other disabilities represented. Like, this is a beautifully, wonderfully celebratory, diverse world, and I love that so much. But there are things here that do feel a little bit similar, and you'll notice that as you read. And I think some people might read these books and might go, oh, well, it's just like Harry Potter. And I would urge you to keep going, because in a lot of ways it is. And I think that's why I loved it so much. But it also corrects a lot of the things that I really don't like about the Harry Potter world. Like, it really celebrates diversity and being who you are in a way that those books never really did. And I think that is just so awesome. As we go into book 2, we start to see a little bit of that. We also get introduced a little bit more to Skandar's sister, who becomes a pretty major player in the story. And by book 3, these characters have now aged up 3 years from starting out. And this is where we start to see like crushes happen, and we start to see characters liking other characters. And that is where you really start to see more of those like queer normative relationships, which I think is really cool. I will say that book 3, I thought was going to be the point where they lost me. I really don't love like competition books, like Hunger Games style books where characters are competing in a trial or a competition or whatever. And so when I saw this was named The Chaos Trials, I was like, this is going to be the book that loses me. This was the book that got my full and complete buy-in, because the way that the story shifts and the way that the status quo is changed in this book throughout the book, but also the ending. The ending of this book left me completely shell-shocked, because they do something at the ending of this book, I'm not going to spoil it, that completely changes the status quo of the story going forward in a way that I just did not think would happen. And when it happened, I was like, what? What? Like, it is crazy levels of a shift of the story. And by that point, I was like, I'm in. I love this. I'm in. Nothing can make me hate this series. I am so in love with it. I cannot wait to keep reading. And I was like, I mean, reading even this book, I was like reading. I was like, I could not put it down. I was so invested. What's really interesting going into book 4, The Skeleton Curse, because of the things that happen at the end of book 3, some things really shift, and tonally things really shift too. This book is pretty dark, and dark to the point that there are villainous characters were like making me full on rage. Okay, so I spend a lot of time reading. Obviously, it's also, you know, part of my job to read and talk about books on the internet. So I read a lot. And one of the ways that I read is every morning I go for a walk for like 45 minutes to an hour, and I listen to audiobooks. So I was listening to this on audiobook as I was going for my morning walks, and I knew I was upset because I have an Apple Watch. I could see that my blood pressure was going crazy. I was walking so fast. Because I was just like, I was so mad. I was so mad. Like, the villain in the story does things that just like make you so livid. But then what's really interesting is the way that our main characters react to that is also just full of surprises. And they take things in a direction that I just really didn't think they would. That's another thing I love about this series. There's so many twists and turns, and sometimes you'll see it coming, but most of the time you're like, whoa, what? What? In really good ways. And it never feels unearned. It never feels out of the blue. It always feels like a natural progression, even though it is like a total surprise when it happens. So we really start to see a really awful villain kind of like rise to the forefront in this book. And what's really interesting about this and the final book is the story starts to go in this direction of kind of like the importance of community building and the importance of friendship and the importance of forgiveness. And all of these things are tied to basically fighting against like a fascist regime, because that is essentially what is happening here. We are seeing a character basically like use propaganda and use lies and use manipulations in order to take control of an entire government, and then hurdle that towards the like downtrodden and less fortunate of this like unicorn society. And watching how these characters fight back against that is really, really powerful, especially in 2025. Okay, like I really felt so in it. Like, I think I felt even angrier on behalf of these characters because I was taking a lot of my rage from the real world and like implementing it into this book. And I was like, they have to win. They have to beat this because I need to know that there is hope for beating this. I really took a lot of my own personal feelings into these books. And I think that is another reason why I enjoyed them so much. And of course, the final book is called The Spirit War. I'm not really going to tell you anything because I don't want to spoil anything, but you can kind of tell from the title what's going on in this book. But really watching all of these forces collide and watching it kind of come to this big head where they're like, you know, fighting for their lives essentially is really powerful. And watching the way that all of the pieces kind of fall by the end of the story, really beautiful. And like I said, in this book, more than any of the others, you really see the power of community, but also like, yes, this is like a love saves the day type story, but it's more than that. It also deals with like the importance of like a friend group and the importance of a family and a found family, and also just the incredible power of forgiveness. I think I can't stress enough how I think really the through line of this book is that forgiveness and the words "I forgive you" are some of the most powerfully like magical words in the English language. And this book really celebrates that idea in a way that I just loved. I sobbed my way through the last few chapters of this book. I didn't want it to end, but also I needed to know how it ended. And I think that the conclusion of this story is perfect. Like, it ends exactly how it should, with all the characters in places where I wanted them to be, in just like the most wonderful way. And yes, there is a ton of heartache along the way. There is a ton of pain. There's a ton of sadness, but there's so much hope and so much beauty and so much wonderfulness watching these characters grow and evolve and fall in love and fight for each other and fight for their freedom and fight for their right to exist and not have to just change because someone in control tells them that they are not worthy of love and affection and being who they are. It's so beautiful and so fantastic. It's so good. Lastly, I will mention there is a like novella or short novel that just came out called The First Unicorn Rider. This came out very recently. This is from the world of Skandar. This essentially is a prequel that deals with kind of like the origins of this island and how humans came to start interacting with unicorns and kind of how this whole system of like bonding with unicorns started. I think this is really cute. I would not start with it. I don't think you should read it first because it kind of spoils a lot of things. And also, I don't know that it adds a ton to the story. Like, it adds some little things that I think are kind of important. And one of the characters in particular is not really mentioned in the books, but then you get to see her in this story. And she's not the protagonist of this book, but she is kind of the star of the show. And so I am glad I read it. I don't think it's essential reading for this series, but if you get to the end of these 5 books and you love them as much as I did, you're going to read this regardless, because you're like, I just need a little bit more. I need a little extra morsel. And that's what this is. It's like a little extra something. And it's nice to see the entire like background and lore of the island and this world sort of put all into one place so you can see kind of how it all happened. I think that's really cool. And it has like pretty great characters. Like A.F. Stedman, I think they write wonderful, lovable, joyful, fantastic characters. And here we get to meet a couple new ones. And I thought that was a lot of fun as well. It should come as no surprise that Skandar was my read of the month. I loved these books so much. And also, if you saw my short, you probably already know I gave this my read of the year. I wouldn't call it my book of the year because it's 6 books, but I did give it my read of the year. I specifically made my video of my top 10 reads to be reads as opposed to books, because there are a couple series that I read this year that to me, I couldn't possibly pick one book out of them to say like, this was the one that was like my favorite, because I read them all together as like one complete story. And that's what happened here. I read Skandar together as one complete story. And so I consider it one complete thing in my reading mind. And so this was easily my favorite thing I read this month. But also I gave this my #1 spot for my read of the year. I just thought it was so fantastic. It reignites my passion for middle grade. It reminds me why middle grade is such a phenomenal reading space, why not just middle graders should be reading middle grade. I think there's so much great middle grade out there that fantasy loving adults will enjoy as well. Skandar is easily my favorite middle grade fantasy series I have ever read. Ever. And I would also go so far as to say that it is one of my favorite fantasy series that I have ever read. I really, truly love this so much. I cannot say enough good things about it. I hope if one thing comes of this video and of my shelf control project over this past year, I hope that is that I convince more people to read the Skandar series, because it is a gem. It is a jewel. It is truly phenomenal, and it just deserves all the love. If even one of you is convinced to try out this series, then my job is done. Then this video is worth making, because this series is wonderful. All right, I promised you a little sneak peek of January, so let's get into it. So for shelf control, the next couple of books that I'm going to be reading are Crane Among Wolves, and then also Death of the Authors. I'm still in my red shelf, which is quickly becoming not very red shelf because I'm putting all these multicolored books up there. But those two are the next things on my shelf control. Shelf control Control sort of remains a project where I just keep going. So if I get through all of these books, I would then continue reading more on my Shelf Control project. But those are at least the two that I want to get through this month. And then if I have time for more, I'll get through more. But those are the two that are for sure coming up next. Star Wars, I've sort of decided that the way I want to tackle Star Wars in 2026 is to kind of bounce back and forth month to month. So because this past month I read something that is technically canon with the films, I am going to be reading something that is from the Legends series, which are the books 3 and 4 in the Star Wars X-Wing series. I'm specifically reading these because I want to get to, there is a whole set of books about Luke restarting the Jedi Order, and everyone has recommended that I finish reading the X-Wing books first before I start heading into that direction, because they do set up a lot of the characters that come into play in those books. So I'm going to do that this month, and then next month I will go back and read some canon Star Wars books, and I'll kind of just keep like bouncing back and forth a little bit. We'll have 1 month of like Legends Star Wars and 1 month of canon Star Wars, and that's kind of how I plan to do Star Wars stuff. For book club, we're going to be reading The Last Ember. I'm especially excited because this is more middle grade. I've heard this book is excellent, and I'm really looking forward to. Skandar has really inspired me to read even more middle grade in 2026 and find those gems that I can recommend that parents can love, the kids can love, everybody can just like enjoy together. And I want to find more books like Skandar. I'm sure more of them exist, and I just haven't read them yet. So I'm going to be kind of searching those out. For sci-fi history, I'm going to be reading We, and I'm going to be reading The Time Machine. So those are my next two books on my sci-fi journey. We, I think, is going to be pretty short, and also The Time Machine is not very long. So I may get a little bit farther on this journey, but I feel like I sort of mentioned this last month. I'm kind of committed to 2 sci-fi history books a month. And I think that's a really good space for this project because I'm making content about it. It's not just like, I read them and then I'm like, I read it, and then I move on. Like I read it, I'm doing some research about it, I'm making a video about it. It's a little bit more of a project than just like read the book. I'm doing it a little bit more as like a research project for myself. And so I think 2 a month is like a good amount because there's a little bit more like back of house work on reading these books than just like reading it and being like, yes, I loved it, or no, I didn't love it. You know what I mean? For the Panelist podcast, our next romance book we're going to be reading is The Flame and the Flower. This is considered the very first bodice ripper, if you know that term. I'm pretty excited to read it. It's on every like best of romance list I've ever seen. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and it'll be a lot of fun to discuss with the other panelists on the podcast. Now, this I think is going to excite a lot of people because it is one of the number one things I get asked about all the time. I am returning to Discworld. So I'm going to be starting where I left off with The Last Continent. I haven't read a Discworld book in over a year at this point. I will say with Discworld, if you read all of them in a row, kind of like Redwall, which is another series I love, but if you read them directly in a row, they start to get a little repetitive, like kind of feel like you're going through the ropes the same over and over and over and over and over again. And I got to a point where I was like, I need a break. Like, I just need a break. And so I took a break, and now I'm excited to jump back into this one. I'm about halfway through the Discworld books. So, and I still intend to eventually read all of them. So I'm going to continue on with that journey. And finally, something that I started at the beginning of this past year that I sort of fell off of as things went on was reading nonfiction. And I was reminded when I was making my top 10 list, one of my favorite books of the year was nonfiction. And it made me realize I wanted to get back into nonfiction. I have a whole bunch of nonfiction books that I bought but haven't read yet. So I am going to be getting back into nonfiction. I'm going to be reading The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs. This book deals kind of with the birth of paleontology and sort of like the first discoveries of dinosaurs and paleontologists like starting to like discover this like hidden past and kind of their conflict with the church at the time, because the church was like, no, that can't be real. We can't be telling people there were giant lizards roaming the land. And so it deals with that like conflict, but also like the early years and kind of the birth of paleontology. I love dinosaurs, so I'm very excited to read this book. I think it's going to be wonderful. And I've read a lot of nonfiction this past year that was like kind of in the political space that I thought was incredible. But I think jumping back into nonfiction, I wanted to do something that was a little bit more on the fun side, just to kind of get me re-excited about nonfiction before I jump into something like really, really serious or like really, really important. Those will for sure come. I have several books that are still on my reading list that deal with history or politics or things in the world. There are books about like AI that I really want to read that I think will be really interesting. But I wanted to start with something a little bit lighter and a little bit more fun, just to like kind of get me back and think it's January too. Like it's the start of the year. I wanted a little light and fluffy for the first month, and then we'll kind of dig in as the month goes on. I thought that was a good way to start. I think starting out the year on a fun note, on a high note is a good thing. And then we can kind of like get into the mess as the month goes on. And that is everything that I read in December. I am so curious. What did you read this month? Did you read anything that you loved? Did you read anything that you hated? Have you read any of the books books that we discussed today, and what did you think of them? Did you love them? Did you hate them? What are your thoughts? I'd love to know. I am really excited that our reading wrap-ups are back. As many of you know, I stopped doing them for most of this year, but then we started back in November, and now we're back here now, and I'm going to continue them. I'm also really excited that I'm going to be pairing a lot of my reading wrap-ups and reading things with my journaling process as well, because I'm going to be keeping track of my reading in my journaling process. So you'll also be kind of seeing those two things sort of intertwine as well. I also think that doing that is going to allow me to keep slightly better notes so that my wrap-ups and the information I provide to you about each of these books can be a little bit more well thought out, a little bit more structured. I think when I get on and do these reading wrap-ups now, it's sort of just like, here are all my random thoughts about this book. I'm hoping to have a little bit more structure going forward into my newer reading wrap-up videos, and I think that'll be really fun. And also you'll kind of get to see, like, as I take notes and the things that I do in my journaling process throughout the month, as well as I like make content around that too. I'm really excited for all of that. And I truly am like very excited for the future of the type of content I want to make on YouTube. So I do want to take this final moment of this video to say a huge thank you. So over the last 3 months, I've sort of restarted my YouTube a little bit. I've kind of re-energized myself around long form content. As you know, going forward, you're going to see reading wrap-ups here, board game and video game playthroughs, and journaling content. Those are going to kind of be the pillars that I'm focusing on YouTube. I just want to say a huge thank you to the community here on YouTube that has been really so encouraging and lovely as I started to make these videos, as I started to learn the ropes here on YouTube about making content and making a thumbnail and making these videos. And you guys have just been so wonderful and so welcoming, and it has just made all of this such a joy. Like, I cannot wait to keep making YouTube videos into the new year, and you guys have made that all possible. And you've really stuck through. You may not know this, but the past 3 months, there's been a lot of like really painful points, like learning about lighting, learning about microphones, learning about sound, learning about exporting videos, learning about how to record videos, learning about webcams. Like, there's been a lot, and I still have so much to learn. But I think it's funny because even if you look at this video versus the video that I did for my reading wrap-up for November, you can already see like a huge quality improvement of like the sound, well, hopefully, and I haven't done the video yet, but like the video quality, like the lighting, like stuff like that. Like, it's all this work in process. It's interesting because I'm just loving the learning aspect of it so much. Like, every video I make, the first thing I think is like, how can I make it better next time? And I am so energized by that. Like, that's one of my favorite things, is just like creating content and figure out ways to just make it better every single time. And you guys have stuck through me through some really rough, you may not realize it, but I realize some really rough like camera issues, some really rough sound issues, some really rough like recording issues, especially in the like video game space. Like, I don't even want to tell you how I was recording video games when I first started doing video game recordings. It's so much worse than how I'm doing it now. It's a little bit crazy that I was even able to record anything and post it because I was having so many issues with the program I was using. But things are like slowly progressing, and I just am grateful that you all have stuck through with me through all of that nonsense. And the hope is that these videos will just get better and better and better as I learn more and more over the coming year. So thank you so much for your encouragement, and I can't wait to do even more of this with you in the new year, in 2026. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you had a wonderful reading month. I hope you had a wonderful reading year, and I hope you have a wonderful reading new year as we head into 2026. Thanks for hanging out and talking about books with me, and as always, happy reading.